planted along the fence in the backyard of the parsonage by Reverend Mary Hubbard when she lived there from 2002 to 2005. Pastor Dennis Tyson lived there from 2005 to 2015. He told me he never saw the first grade during those years. I haven't seen any either. Thus, I say it is reportedly a grapevine. Now, years ago, Barbara flew to San Francisco for a professional conference, and since her flight and hotel room were paid for, all we would need would be a ticket for me and some spending money. She let me come along to carry the luggage and serve as her arm candy. After the conference was over, we took a tour of some sites in Northern California. Muir Woods, Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz, and the famed Napa Valley wine country. It was awesome to see acres after acres after acres of lush green vines loaded with fruit. But if we'd made the trip during another part of the year, the vineyard views would have been quite different. Jesus said, "I am the true vine. My Father is the vineyard keeper. He removes any of my branches that don't produce fruit, and He trims any branch that produces fruit so that it will produce even more fruit." Now, those words are directed to both churches and individual church members. Christ is the true vine. You and me, we're the branches. And we've only got one job: to bear fruit. That's why we've been called together as a community. We're not here simply to enjoy one another's company. It's a good thing if you do, but that's not the reason we exist as a church. We're here to be nourished so that we may bear fruit in our homes, in our community, and in the world for which Christ died. So the question for today is, where's your fruit? Is our church a better church because you're here? Is your home a better home because you're here? Is our community a better place because you're here? Is the world a better place because you're here? Where's your fruit? Now, some of us, as one person said, have grown too comfortable in Zion. John Wesley charged his early circuit riders. He said, "You have nothing to do but save souls." And pastors in the 21st century say, "If only." We can get wrapped up and bogged down in the admonition of the church. But parishioners of those pastors too often get similarly misdirected. We too often forget our main task is to make a difference in the world. Our main task is to make Christ known in our homes and in our community. I mean, look at the words printed on the front wall. Love God, love others. Now, turn around, because you've probably seen this every time you walk out, but you got to the point you don't pay attention to it anymore. Well, look at that. I mean, seriously, folks, you can turn your, you need to get up in order to turn around. I want you to look, what's that say? It says, remind us every time we walk out to go get our coffee and donut or to head directly out to the parking lot so we can beat the other churches to the buffet line. We need to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is to bear fruit. Jesus put it pretty pointedly, didn't he? If you don't remain in me, you'll be like a branch that is thrown out and it dries up. And those branches, once they're dried up, they're really not good for anything other than possibly mulch. But they're thrown into the fire and burned. What good's a grapevine like the one there in the backyard of the parsonage without any grapes? Tear them down. Strip their branches. Throw them into the flames. We're to bear fruit. That's our job. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, we produce fruit by staying connected to the vine. Later in this passage, Jesus said, "Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." It's not a great mystery. The message is clear. The key to bearing fruit is staying connected to Christ. Recently, the upper room, that little pocket daily devotional guide that our United Methodist women make available for folks right out there in the Connection Center. It had a devotion about a woman in a much warmer climate in our nation who had a guava tree in her yard that bore really nice, juicy, large guavas. And twice a year, in April and July, she looked forward to enjoying the fruit of her guava tree. But for some reason, one year in April came, no crop, no guavas. She was so disappointed. She did everything she'd normally do to make sure that the tree got all of it that it needed to bear fruit. The roots were deep, there was sunlight, and of course the tree got the water it needed. Then July came around, the same thing happened as it happened or didn't happen in April. No guavas. She couldn't understand. Her impatient husband said, "Babe, let's just cut this tree down, plant a mango tree. Because it's only taking up space." And she knew he was right. Their yard wasn't that big, so there really wasn't room for a plant that was useless. They didn't plant it just to be ornamental. They planted it so they could enjoy eating guavas. She was very disappointed, wanted to give us some more time. But he wasn't willing to wait another year to see if the fruit would come. So finally she agreed to cut it down. After they cut it down, they discovered why the tree was not bearing fruit. A few surface roots had somehow been damaged. Therefore, the tree wasn't getting the right amount of nutrients from the soil that it needed. And that, of course, made her feel really bad about the decision they'd made to cut it down so quickly. Had they seen what the problem was, they might have been able to remedy it. She once again would have been able to look forward to that biennial crop of guavas. Reflecting on this experience, the woman realized that whole thing paralleled her walk with Christ. If she allowed damage to take place to a few surface roots on her connection to the Lord, then she wouldn't receive the nutrients that she needed to keep Jesus alive and fresh in her heart. And then she would not be able to produce the fruits of the Spirit, which Paul lists in Galatians 5:22-23. Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Let me just as an aside here, in the church we often talk about folks having spiritual gifts of the Spirit, and we try to emphasize the biblical truth that we're going to have different spiritual gifts. The interesting thing about fruits of the Spirit, as followers of Jesus, we're supposed to demonstrate we've got all of those. Now, some of us have more of one or two than we do of others, but that's what we're called. That's the kind of fruit we're supposed to be bearing. All of those fruits of the Spirit. You find that in the 5th chapter of Galatians. Now, if we're going to bear fruit, we have to stay connected to the vine. We have to stay connected to Christ, because He's the only true source of our life. And I hope that is the primary reason you're here this morning. Because you want to stay connected to Jesus so you can bear more fruit. But you know what? There's a word of warning in that passage. Jesus said, I'm the true vine, my Father's the vineyard keeper. He removes any of my branches that don't produce fruit. And He trims any branch that produces fruit so that it will produce even more fruit. You are already trimmed because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, I will remain in you. You know, 30 plus years of ministry, I've discovered something you may not be willing to admit, but once I mention it, I think you'll say, yep. Because there are some people in every group, including the church, who just are not interested in bearing fruit. People who work around fruit trees or grapevines are probably familiar with the term sucker shoots. Sucker shoots are branches that have no fruit but literally suck up the nutrients the other branches need. Sucker shoots never bear fruit, but they greatly reduce the quantity and the quality of fruit that the other branches can bear. Every group has sucker shoots, even the church. Folks who only take up space. They're really not interested in bearing fruit. Only in making themselves look good. Even worse, there are a few people that are actually poisonous to the group. There's a tree that grows in warmer tropical climates that can actually kill you. Eating its fruit brings painful suffering, sometimes death. Indigenous peoples use the sap of the bark, put the poison on their darts for hunting. It's called the manchineel tree. It produces loads of small, green, apple-looking fruit, about the size of a rather large crab apple. But, oh, don't eat them, because they're quite poisonous. And if ingesting the fruit don't kill you, you probably wish it had. And it's not just the fruit that's toxic, it's the entire tree. Roots, trunk, bark, branches, and leaves. I mean, just standing underneath a manchineel tree can be a horrifying experience, especially if it's raining. You know, folks, when it rains, we'll seek shelter just about anywhere to slow down the rain. But if you try to shelter under the leaves of this tree, you're going to be drenched in drops of acidic acid, acidic sap dripping from the leaves. When it rains, drops that have made contact with the tree fall on the folks seeking shelter, and the result is severe rashes and blistering of the skin. Christopher Columbus encountered that tree. He called it the tree of death. Anybody here want to take shelter under the tree of death? And And there are poisonous personalities in every group, including the church. These folks not only don't bear fruit, they actually do enormous harm to the work of the kingdom. They love to sow dissension. They delight in passing along rumors and innuendos, although sometimes they try to clean it up by saying it's a prayer concern for someone. They think they're harmless, but they're actually enemies of Christ. So you and I need to use more discernment when we're around them. Make sure certain we don't allow them to infect us. Love them, pray for them, treat them the way you want to be treated. But understand, they're misguided in their mischief. God knows their hearts. God knows the kind of fruit each of us is bearing, or whether we're bearing any fruit at all. Now, when Jesus talks about a branch that is removed, I'm not exactly sure what he meant by that, but it sure doesn't sound like anything to be desired, does it? I mean, what happens to someone who's been cut off from the vine when the earth opens up beneath their feet? The loss of a child, or a spouse, or a job. What happens when the news from the doctor about the test results isn't good news? When they reach out for God, will God be there? I mean, we tend to culturally we have turned Jesus into Santa Claus. So, and Santa Claus only brings good things. So when we talk about something being removed or cut off, that's probably not in most of our faith vocabularies yet. Those words are right there in what Jesus is teaching. So, sucker shoots in poisonous trees. ought to take that to heart. Where's your fruit? But there's a second group Christ mentions beside those that bear no fruit, because he says that God cuts off every branch that bears no fruit. And then remember what he said? He says every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so it will bear more fruit. I think he's talking about us. And I think he's saying that even when we do bear fruit, life is not going to be all seashells and balloons. Pruning can be painful. When the owner of the vineyard prunes a vine, they don't just cut away dead vine wood, they cut into the living vine. And the vineyards in early spring look like a collection of barren, bleeding stumps. But by the fall harvest, they're filled with luxuriant purple grapes. As the vineyard workers cut, they wield those pruning knives on the vines, so God cuts dead wood from among his saints, and often cuts back the living wood so far that sometimes that method can seem rather cruel. But the greatest fruitfulness so often comes from those who have suffered the most. I don't know about you, I don't want to volunteer to look like a barren, bleeding stump. I'm not a masochist. But here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying sometimes life hurts. My followers are not immune to tragedy. In fact, some of my most prized saints have experienced tragedy because they are my followers. Now, when tragedy comes, as it does, there's little good in asking God, why me? Why did this happen? Because, that's a one question. And I'm like, God never seems to answer that. The question we should be asking is, God, is there some way you can use this to prune me and cause me to bear even more fruit for your glory? Maybe that's the difference between those that are cut off and those that are pruned. It never occurs to those who are cut off to ask that question because they're really not interested in bearing fruit. So tragedy is just meaningless. And they may even view that as a cruel punishment from God. And all that's left for them is to lash out at God in anger, but the person who's able to pray in the face of great tragedy, Lord, is there some way you can use this to prune me and cause me to bear more fruit for your glory? It's going to find a source of strength. It never dreamed possible. Will Willimon was the dean of the chapel. He was the chaplain and the campus preacher at Duke University. Later elected bishop in the United Methodist Church, now retired. But in one of his recent books, he recalled a sensitive and beautiful story about a young couple who understood that the meaning of God's pruning in a way that it ought to humble all of us. Early in his ministry, he said he arrived in a hospital room where a woman had just given birth, and he'd been told, quote, there were problems. The couple sat in the hospital room waiting for the doctor, and the doctor appeared shortly after Willimon got there and said to the new parents, he said, "You got a new baby boy, but there are some problems. Your child has been born with Down syndrome. Your baby also has a rather minor and correctable respiratory condition. My recommendation is for you to consider just letting nature take its course. And then in a few days there won't be a problem." The couple seemed confused by what the doctor told them. If the condition can be corrected, then we want it corrected. The doctor said, you must understand that studies show that parents who keep these children have a high incidence of marital distress and separation. Is it fair for you to bring this sort of suffering upon your other two children? At the mention of the word suffering, Willimon wrote, it was as if the doctor finally began speaking the woman's language. She said, our children have had every advantage in the world. They've really never known suffering. Never had the opportunity to know it. I don't know if God's hand is in this or not, but I could certainly see why it would make sense for a child like this to be born into a family like ours. Our children will do just fine. When you think about it, this is a great opportunity. The doctor looked confused, just abruptly left the room. Will Willimon followed him out in the hall, and the doctor said, Reverend, I hope you can talk some sense into them. Talk some reason into them. Willimon wrote, the couple was already using reason, but it was reasoning that was for the doctor. the kind of reasoning that's foreign to everybody that's among the removed branches. It's the kind of reasoning that knows that God can use all things to the good of those who love Him, as Romans 8:28 says. It doesn't mean God causes bad things to happen to good people. God doesn't have to send bad things into our lives. The world that left perfection behind in the Garden of Eden will do that quite well enough on its own. But it does say that God can use any difficult event that occurs in our lives to help us become the people He called us to be. So where's your fruit? And have you been pruned? Pastor Dennis Tyson told me he'd pruned that parsonage grapevine at least twice in his years here. And I've done it once. I cut it off all the way to the ground. Grew back, still no grapes. Perhaps it is time to dig up roots and all and leave it by the curb so that we don't have any violation of any open burning ordinance. But I'll leave that up to the Board of Trustees. It's only after we've been pruned that we can bear the most splendid fruit of all. That's what the writer of the letter of James meant when he wrote in James 1, 2 through 8. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you can be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Can you do that? Can you take any adverse trial and pray, Lord, is there some way you can use this to prune me so that I may bear more fruit for your glory? If you can, God will use you in a wondrous way. Can you? I know you can. Will you? Only you know. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, keep us connected to you in every way we can with your help. Prune us where you need, so that we might bear abundant fruit for you in our homes, in our church, in our community, and in your world. Amen. I invite you to stand if you're able, and let's sing.